Welcome everyone to our CREDO Facebook Live event today with Doctors Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders is the translation of the French name Médecins Sans Frontières, otherwise known as MSF, and that's what we're going to call them for the rest of the day today. MSF is an independent international medical humanitarian organization that delivers emergency aid to people affected by conflict, epidemics, natural and man-made disasters, and those excluded from healthcare. MSF's work is based on the principles of medical ethics and impartiality. They provide care based on needs alone, irrespective of race, religion, gender, or political affiliation. They do not adhere to any political, military, or religious agendas. On any given day, MSF is active in over 70 countries, where more than 45,000 staff members assist millions of people caught in crises around the world. MSF staff is made up of medical professionals, logistical experts, administrators, and many others who combine their professional expertise with a commitment to the world's most vulnerable people. CREDO has supported MSF since 1992, and we've donated more than $1.6 million to MSF through revenue generated by our CREDO Mobile, CREDO Energy, CREDO Long Distance, and Working Assets credit card products and customers. Thank you all, if you're watching there today, for what you've done. MSF was last on the CREDO donations voting ballot in May of this year, and through the strong votes of all of our members, they received another $61,830 in CREDO donations. So today, Avril Benoît is with us. She is the Executive Director of MSF in the U.S., and she's joining us to talk more about MSF's work with all of us here in the office, as well as all of our CREDO members online. So welcome and thank you. She's worked with MSF since 2006, and she's contributed to major initiatives, including the global mobilization to end attacks on hospitals and health workers. And she served as country director and project coordinator for MSF, leading operations to provide aid to refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants in Mauritania, South Sudan, and South Africa. And her assignments have taken her to countries including the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Eswatini, Haiti, Iraq, Lebanon, Mexico, Mozambique, Nigeria, Sudan, and Syria. Please join me in welcoming Avril Benoît to CREDO today. We're so glad to have you. Come on up. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Trish, and thanks for your warm hospitality here. And knowing CREDO a little bit and your subscribers and your activism, I wanted to give you a bit of a briefing on some of the issues that we're facing today at Médecins Sans Frontières, or MSF, Doctors Without Borders. So we are working in a lot of places where we feel the need to speak out very clearly when it comes to the treatment of people who are forced to flee, people who are on the move. Some of them are refugees, some of them are internally displaced, they're asylum seekers, they're migrants for a variety of reasons, but people who really felt that they have no choice. So here is a mother that you see in the photograph with her baby, a Rohingya mom from Myanmar who had fled to Bangladesh, to the large camps that are there at the border. And she's a refugee because she crossed a border, but it's very complicated for her because the Rohingya people are stateless. They're a people that, as a minority ethnic group in the region, are just not given the opportunity to get passports, to register, and to receive official support. And so they fled, of course, these moments of persecution a couple of years ago that started, and they fled across the border. So what we are seeing as Doctors Without Borders, it really is a crisis when it comes to migrants and refugees. And it's not a crisis because of the numbers of people, although the numbers are impressive. We're talking about 71 million people who are forced to be displaced. They are fleeing for their lives. They're fleeing from gang violence. They're fleeing from war, from bombs. They're fleeing from just the inability to make a living. There are a number of reasons that people just feel like they cannot make it anymore and they have to get out. And so we feel it's a crisis not because of them, though. For us, this is a crisis of policies. It's a crisis of politics. We have laws governing how you are supposed to receive somebody who is requesting asylum, requesting protection. And what we find increasingly in many countries around the world, not just in the United States, is that there's an erosion of that adherence to international policies. And you might wonder, well, why is a medical organization talking about policies like that? Aren't you apolitical? Well, we are, insofar as we're not taking sides in the election, we're not requesting that this government fall or regime change or things like that. We just want the international norms to be respected. And the reason we say so is because we see how these policies are making people sicker, are making people who are already in the most vulnerable situation in their lives more sick, more vulnerable, more frail. It is harming people. So it exacerbates suffering for people who need our help. And it's kind of like an administrative cruelty that we are seeing in many parts of the world. So I'll just give you a bit of an overview on what we're seeing. So sometimes you wonder, is it better for people to end up in camps? So this is one of the camps of Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, for the Rohingya refugees. And certainly it's easier for humanitarian aid to deliver support. We can distribute food, we can offer shelters, tents, we can set up clinics, mobile clinics and what have you, and we do all of that in camps. But the thing to remember about camps is that it's a really inhumane place to live for very long. And some of the camps that we've been working in, such as the ones in northern Kenya, they've been there for 30 years. These people are stuck, and they're not being given that opportunity to resettle anywhere. So we'll come back around to that because it's something that's really worrying us. What you also find among people who are displaced is that they and especially in war zones, in places where they've been neglected, where their health care has been neglected for so many years, is that they're starting to acquire diseases that they should have been immunized against as babies. So diphtheria is one. In the camps in Bangladesh, we have treated 7,000 cases of diphtheria. And this is a disease that we thought was long behind us. I mean, the medical community had pretty much lost its skills in terms of how to even treat this very complicated, very cruel, highly infectious disease. And it's because children were not vaccinated that we have in Yemen, in Bangladesh now in the camps, these cases of diphtheria, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. So we're giving this boy an antitoxin to hope that he will get better. But it's certainly one of the things that we see as a medical organization is that people are more vulnerable, more exposed, the more they're on the move like this. When you have a case of diphtheria, it's a bit like Ebola or any other highly contagious disease. You have to go out and find the people who may have been exposed. So this contact tracing would then lead to prophylaxis treatment. You give them what you can. In Ebola in Democratic Republic of Congo, we're working in zones in North Kivu and Ituri where you've got people who are, some of them on the move, living very precariously, and you just need to find them to give them the vaccine. In this case, this is what we're doing in Cox's Bazar and in the camps in Bangladesh. We also see in a lot of the places where we work that certain people are particularly in distress because they may have fled, although I should add that a lot of elderly people are left behind. The young ones go because they can run, and you often find in Ukraine, for example, we found this, that the elderly just they're not able to always keep up. But if they do flee, like this lady, you might have a chronic disease and you've become separated now from the medical care that has kept you alive. So she has diabetes. We have other people with cardiovascular disease. Those who were in Syria, who are displaced or who have fled, They had fairly modern healthcare. It was a reasonably good healthcare, looking after people with non-communicable diseases, and people were used to getting their medication. Now suddenly, you can imagine you're on the run, living in a shelter, sleeping on the ground. You're looking for the next safe place that you can maybe register somewhere, get some more support. Like this 77-year-old woman, you're so happy to finally have a medical team that is able to take your diabetes in hand. And this is the case for many of the people like her that we have looked after in Syria. So in terms of the sheer numbers, we have at the moment 5.6 million Syrians who have fled since the civil war started in 2011. And that's not even as many as are internally displaced in the country who were not able to cross the border and register with the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, as refugees. So these are internally displaced people. And here we have an image of some that were in one of the camps. And of course, these were camps that we were working in up until a few weeks ago, where the policies of the US government to withdraw the troops led to a policy of the Turkish government to try to clear out the zone, to start bombing. We had to withdraw our teams from this area, from the camps that we were working in. We had to evacuate the international staff, and we're deeply worried about our Syrian colleagues who are there with their families, who remain behind and are looking to find a safe place. They do not feel safe. And so as a consequence, our teams on the Iraq side of the border are setting up clinics and mobile clinics to be able to receive those that are now fleeing from northeastern Syria. One of the places that we worked for years, and we can only hope with our departure is still functioning, is this hospital in Al-Hasakeh. And this was a hospital that had been completely abandoned, no more equipment. Staff were still there and were showing up to work even if they weren't always paid, but it had been sort of stripped of everything that made it function. And so we invested heavily in the rehabilitation of this hospital. And we were looking after cases of families who had returned. So Islamic State took over their areas they fled, Islamic State was cleared out, and they came back home, and they would find themselves so happy to be back in their homes, only to discover that the refrigerator door was booby-trapped, that there was a landmine on the roof, that the kids were in danger just about everywhere from these landmines, from different sort of unexploded devices that you usually find as the remnants of any conflict that's gone around. And so these girls found something as they were playing, and it blew off their legs. And so this hospital was doing life-changing surgery to save their lives, but also to do the rehabilitation that would allow them to get on with their lives as kids. And it was a very important work, and we're devastated that we can't work there anymore. Some of the camps, as I mentioned, you know, you're sort of thankful that people end up in them, if only because it makes it easier to quickly deliver aid. You can dig the latrines and you can set up the water points, which for us as a health organization is really key. You can quickly do a vaccination and so forth, but people don't want to live in them. And if they have any sort of family contact on the outside, the first thing they want is to be able to get out, reach their families. But what I found when I was speaking to some women who were in a camp in northern Syria, and I went from tent to tent just to chat with the women that were there with their kids, and maybe they were there with their elderly parents, is they said that this is devastating to us to be here. Where we used to live, we had running water, we had TV, and here we are in a tent and having to cross the sand to go to the latrine. We don't feel safe. We don't feel like our children are safe. And we want to go. We just want to reach our relatives. We have relatives in Turkey. We have relatives in Lebanon. But because these families who had fled Mosul after Islamic State was slowly being defeated there, so this is the final, this is on the Iraq side, so this was the final push to get Islamic State out of Mosul. These families fled, and they were in a camp being treated like suspects. Now, if you know anything about Islamic State and how they treated people, it's not always very clear to me that the people were willingly entrapped in that situation. But they at least deserve a kind of due process. Were you with them or against them? Were you a victim of this, or were you part of it? You know, but there's no process for these people. They're just put in a camp and they're not allowed out. And that, to us, is just a failure of policy. Just as any reasonable person, if we were caught up in some sort of grand sweep, we would want at least to be able to plead our case and say, in my specific situation, I am fleeing for my life, and did not want to be any part of that. So what we also see in different parts of the world is that Syria has been in the news, other countries are in the news. For a while we had Afghanistan, now it's very deadly in Afghanistan right now. There are places with massive refugee crises going on, lots of people really clinging to life in different places, and you don't hear about them on the news. You know, some of them have been there for so long that at a certain point, even the aid agencies stop responding because it's just, come on, like we can't be here forever. So we now talk about this almost 71 million people who are forcibly displaced. Of that group, the UN figures that there are 26 million who are refugees right now. 41 million, so a larger number, are these internally displaced. So this is what you would find inside Syria, the people who were not able to cross a border and escape. And the top 3 countries that are still producing refugees are Syria, Afghanistan, and South Sudan, in that order. And the greatest number of new asylum claims, new asylum seekers, are coming from Venezuela. So it gives you a bit of a portrait of the problem. Doctors Without Borders has been gaining a fair amount of attention in recent years for work that we've been doing on the Mediterranean. Search and rescue, for us, is not the kind of thing that we would normally do. But we were seeing people drown. We were seeing people so desperate to flee that they needed to be rescued from the ocean. But by trying to save people and working with other organizations who pretty much run the ships, and then we just provide the medical support on board, we've been the target of policies of governments who would like to criminalize the rescuers, who would like to charge us with all kinds of strange invented charges. We've been attacked by politicians openly, and certainly by trolls on social media, to the point that now, our social media community managers have vicarious trauma from all the hatred they have spewing our way from different parts of the world, but especially around the Mediterranean. So a very strong anti-migrant backlash, like we see in the US, but in fact, this is something that we commonly see, an open expression of hatred toward the organizations that are trying to help. And, you know, we try to explain that maritime law requires that other vessels in the zone of a ship in distress or of another boat in distress are supposed to go and rescue. It's against the law, maritime law, not to go and rescue. So yes, we have cooperated and do cooperate with other vessels and ships and organizations that are doing the search and rescue, because we feel that on board it's very helpful to have medical support. We have women who are very advanced stages of pregnancy, sometimes delivering on the boats. We also have people who have suffered extreme burns from the explosions when the vessels, you know, mix the water and the heat and the caseload is usually pretty healthy. They're a bit dehydrated, but sometimes you have these extreme cases and you think, well, thank goodness we were there to help those. Nonetheless, we're often called, you know, the taxis of the smugglers, as if we are somehow in cahoots with those who have been exploiting these people every step of the way. And this is something that we've tried to push back against, because we're also not only working on the Mediterranean, we're working in all the countries that are the origin places why people are fleeing, and we are working in Libya. In the detention centers, you have people who have been picked up. These are undocumented migrants, often from sub-Saharan Africa, for example, but also from Syria, from Afghanistan, from other countries that are very clearly at war. And what we find in these detention centers is that the people are often not afforded due process. Even the UN is having difficulty sometimes because it's a business now. They are exploited. You've seen maybe some reports of the cruelty that's inflicted. There was one story about slavery. We didn't have so much of a portrait of that, but what we have heard is that these are people who, along the route and in these detention centers, are sometimes tortured, they're exploited, and the women are sexually exploited. Something that we see very commonly with people who are forced to flee is that out of desperation, you engage in a transaction to save your life and to get your kids on that truck going across the desert. You will do anything, and you will do whatever is asked. And so this sexual violence that the women have suffered and various forms of torture we see in so many places. And what we also noticed in the vitriol against organizations like us and against those who are trying to flee is that whereas in the old days you would say, well, we just don't want them here in Europe, or we don't want them here in the US. But in the European context, increasingly what we would hear is not just we don't want them here or send them back, as if sending them back to a Libyan detention center is a viable option under any sort of human rights concept. What we hear is let them drown. It's that cruel. Let them drown. And for us, this is just untenable. In Greece, many have made it across the short little hop. They've managed to get onto these islands. Chios, Lesbos, there are a number of small islands that are now having these refugee camps. And the camps were built for a certain number of people, say 7,500 or 2,500, and instead you have 7,500 who are crammed in there. These are kids who have been running from war with their families. They're not vaccinated, so that's usually one of the first things a medical organization like Doctors Without Borders would do. But then we have the further indignity of this girl, the 12-year-old on the left. She was diagnosed with a tumor. She suffers from epileptic seizures on a regular basis. And she is in a camp on an island and not being given the opportunity to be medevaced out of there to receive the care at the high level that she needs. So meanwhile, she's living in a tent with 6 members of her family, including a 97-year-old grandfather, with 4 other families in a very small space. And what we've also noticed of these particular young people in the Greek camps is that they are self-harming. They feel so much despair, and of course it spills over from the parents. They feel absolutely no hope. They're self-harming. Even young kids are trying to commit suicide. And this is what you can imagine would happen when there are sexual predators sometimes from, that the daughters are exposed to. So then you say, well, my daughter, you're going to stay in the tent all the time. Not because I have some rule about this normally, but I just need to protect you. And you're not going to be offered schooling. Years are going by. The Syrian war has been going on since 2011. These families have been displaced multiple times as they try to reach the next destination. These are the life jackets in a dump, life jackets of people who did make the crossing. And for me, this is a symbol. Even the great Chinese artist Ai Weiwei has done works of art based on this motif, because the life jackets in some ways represent how we treat these people like garbage. The life jacket, of course, was something that probably kept them afloat when they were the boat capsized. But at the same time, then we just dump them. We dump them in a camp. We dump them into a no-hope situation. And this, for us, is a policy that is exacerbating the medical needs of these people. So in a place like this, of course, you have the survivors of sexual violence. You have people with anxiety, with stress, with mental health issues. And in order to create a bit of a private environment for them, you might put a structure like this, a mobile clinic, so that you can have a private consultation. This is the kind of work we're doing. But of course, we can't talk about this topic without bringing it closer to home. So we look at the border area and the Triangle region from Central America, various countries which are very dangerous, and how they're trying to get through Mexico, and they finally end up at the border between Mexico and the US. And what we're finding increasingly is that people are telling us stories of what the gangs have done to them. Of course, the gangs have kidnapped people, they've extorted them, they've stolen all their money. But increasingly, we've been reporting in some countries and in some of our clinics that people have experienced torture, like real cruelty, at the hands of the gangs. And so we do medical and psychological consultations with people as they're coming through. And the stories are a nightmare. I mean, it's so difficult. They are put in confined areas with very high temperatures. Their telephones are taken away from them. The telephone, you can imagine, is your lifeline in a situation like that. This is often the first thing not only that gangs do, but coincidentally governments do, is they take your phone, your one way to call your family ahead and say, we're safe, we made it to this location, or we're on our way, can you pick us up? This is one of the most difficult things, but also to hear how they've been robbed at gunpoint, robbed at knife point, raped. These are the kinds of stories that convince us that it's just not right to send them back to those places. You know, we think it's normal to just deport people back to where they came from, but think about it. You have some families where the father has been kidnapped, finally he's released, they finally flee, and they're in a situation where they're being told, well, you just go back to where you came from. To us, it's just not possible to listen to these stories and think that that's right. And that's why we speak out about what's going on in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, but as well as what's happening at the US border, on the Mexico side. So our country director in Mexico was recently quite vocal about this, and he talked about how if people are compelled to escape, none of these deals that the US would have with these other countries to deport them back are going to work. There is no deal, there's no wall that will stop people from trying to find safety. And the deals are in fact only helping the traffickers. They're helping those who are criminalizing this whole arrangement. And that's why the violence and extortion is a direct result for us. Obviously, the gangs, the cartels are responsible, but it is also a result of the fact that we have allowed them to be responsible by not having proper reception policies, policies that would give you a chance to say, you know what, I was kidnapped, here's the proof, we have fled, this is what will happen to me if we go back. So we have a case here of Ruth, who has 4 kids. Her husband there was kidnapped, and she's stuck at the border. She is stuck at that, you know, in one of those towns where we often send people back. We have teams working with different organizations that are running sort of migrant reception centers. They're often churches, and we provide the health care. And, you know, here they are trying to cross, trying to get to safety, and they are in a place where the cartels, towns like Reynosa, these border towns are completely dangerous. You know, they're sitting ducks in a situation like that. They were already assaulted. They've already lost everything. They have nowhere to turn. And they just don't want to be living a life of sheer terror every day by going back to their home. I'd like to show you this little video that really encapsulates why we've been so focused on this issue. And for those of you in California, I think this will resonate.
El contexto migratorio no es algo nuevo, son décadas de cientos de miles de personas que utilizan este corredor, ¿no? para huir de las situaciones de violencia que viven en sus países. Nosotros tenemos proyectos en Honduras, en El Salvador. Lo que vemos también a lo largo de esta ruta migratoria es la gente al final huye por una combinación de factores. Es violencia ligada al narcotráfico, ligada a la extorsión, pero también buscando oportunidades. Nuestro objetivo es mejorar la atención médico-humanitaria a esta población en necesidad, y nuestra estrategia es identificar aquellos puntos a lo largo de la ruta migratoria donde más necesidades hay, nos coordinamos con lo que ya existe y aportamos esta asistencia médica de primer nivel, asistencia en salud mental y en trabajo social. A nivel de cambios, en 2018 lo que hemos visto es un incremento general del flujo migratorio. El segundo cambio, perfil del migrante. En la ruta que tradicionalmente es más utilizada por hombres, que es la ruta del tren a través de esta red de trenes conocida, ¿no?, como la bestia, empezábamos a ver cada vez más mujeres, más niños, más familias. Y bueno, y el tercer cambio significativo fue, al mismo tiempo que se incrementaba el flujo, también se incrementaron de manera generalizada las deportaciones. Pero ya no solo las deportaciones de las personas que acaban de cruzar, sino de personas que llevaban viviendo 15, 20, 30 años en Estados Unidos y que de pronto se encontraban en un país que ya no es el suyo. Este fue uno de las razones que nos movió también a atender a esta población deportada. Y el cuarto cambio fue el fenómeno de las caravanas. Las caravanas no es algo nuevo, se han estado organizando desde hace años, pero más como un instrumento de incidencia. Las caravanas de madres de migrantes desaparecidos, porque no podemos olvidar que esta frontera México-Estados Unidos es la segunda más mortífera del mundo, después del Mediterráneo. Pero de pronto, el año pasado, a finales del año pasado, se empiezan a utilizar como instrumento para visibilizar una situación que pasaba de manera invisible, que creemos este año sobrepasará el 500.000 de personas, y el hecho de agruparse, de tener esta atención mediática, en cierta manera les garantiza un poquito más de protección. En Nuevo Laredo, está en Tamaulipas, es uno de los estados más violentos de México. El 56% de los pacientes que vemos en consulta han sufrido un evento de violencia en las últimas 4 semanas, o sea, les ha pasado allí. Hablamos de secuestro, extorsión. A nivel de riesgos, afectaciones médicas, las principales morbilidades que vemos en consulta son infecciones respiratorias, todo lo que son infecciones de la piel, gastrointestinales, esto muchas veces ligado pues, a las condiciones del viaje, ¿no? Y a nivel de salud mental, a nivel de síntomas, vemos ansiedad, depresión y estrés postraumático, ¿no? Hablamos de personas que vienen huyendo de una combinación de factores, pero no podemos obviar que uno de los principales factores por los cuales la gente sale de sus países de origen, del Triángulo Norte de Centroamérica, es la violencia, y lo que se encuentran en ruta es todavía más violencia.
So just to come back a little bit to the overall picture, you may have heard of how many refugees, and these are people who are registered, whose claims have been noted, they are listed officially as refugees. 26 million people are awaiting resettlement somewhere. They may be stuck in a camp somewhere, they're looking for that chance to have a better life. And of those 26 million, and we're not talking about the internally displaced, just the ones that have crossed over, they have registered, they're refugees. Only 92,000 globally will be resettled anywhere. And the US has now slashed the number that we are willing to accept next year, 18,000. So a tiny, tiny, tiny contribution toward the resettlement of this global issue. So the refugee program will only accept 18,000 over the next 12 months. And of that 18,000, only 1,500 will be from Central America or Mexico. So this is the way the numbers are going to break down. You can see that this is not going to resolve the problem. So we appreciate all the activism that other groups are doing. We focus on the medical, but just to draw your attention to the fact that we see what they see through the medical lens, and we really hope that we can all together make enough noise about this issue. And just to project and finish with one thought for you, which is a really frightening one, is that there's another looming trigger for mass displacement that we can expect in the coming years, and that's the climate emergency. So climate change and the various socioeconomic factors that will exacerbate the living conditions for people. The natural disasters, well, here's a photo of Mozambique when they had the catastrophic storm and flooding as a consequence. We will have more drought, more flooding. Right now we're dealing with massive flooding in South Sudan, in Somalia. I mean, these are places that are just seeing a scale. We don't know directly if it's climate change, but certainly all the scientific projections, the modeling shows us that it will be more frequent, and that is certainly what we are seeing. So the scientists are telling us that by 2050, the world will see 200 million more people displaced because of the effects of climate change, of the climate emergency. And so that's nearly twice the estimated 108 million right now that are displaced and needing help from humanitarian agencies like ours. So this is a scale of need which makes us compelled ethically to say something. We join the scientists. We're not scientists. We're not doing the modeling. We leave it to them. But there is no question that we feel, like other organizations, that this will be overwhelming to the humanitarian responders. And that's why we're raising the alarm along with the scientists. So in general, you know, when it comes to climate refugees, this whole notion of climate migrants, people just trying to find better pasture, they're just moving as if this is a normal thing. Well, of course, it is normal. I mean, my ancestors were crossing because of the Irish potato famine. The potatoes, there was a blight, they all had to come across, they came to North America, and boom, here I am as a descendant of boat people. But we will go, as Doctors Without Borders, as Médicos Sin Fronteras, the extra mile to counter the narratives that this is somehow the fault of the people trying to flee, that they are just trying to jump the queue, that they're just, you know, they should put up with whatever bombs are falling on their head or whatever crime is being inflicted upon them. So we know that the deterrence policies are cruel. We see that every day in our projects. And this is something that we hope that we have your support in helping us to address. And with that, I have one last short video for you, which pretty much sums up why we stand with refugees.
We are Doctors Without Borders.
Médecins Sans Frontières.
We are Doctors Without Borders.
Médecins Sans Frontières.
Madaktari wasio na mipaka.
We work with migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers
In Mexico.
In Lebanon, Bangladesh,
In Libya.
in Nigeria.
in Greece,
In Tanzania and all over the world. Men, women and children
Who seek safety are treated like criminals.
Vulnerable people are being turned away.
Many are pushed back into danger, even when they ask for protection.
imagine.
Lack of water, lack of sanitation, no space to breathe. Sleeping on the floor of a cell crammed with people, not knowing what will happen to you.
They are targeted by criminal groups
and left waiting in limbo.
Even if they reach a safe country,
they might not be able to access medical and mental health care.
All live in miserable conditions with no proper shelter, no security, no hope for the future.
let's be clear. Some people need to cross borders to survive.
Seeking safety is not a crime.
Nothing,
Not a war.
or even an ocean.
Will ever stop people who are simply trying to survive.
It's time to speak up.
And stand with refugees.
It's time to speak up.
and stand with refugees.
It's time to speak up and stand with refugees.
Thank you so much for your attention and for standing with us for refugees. Over to you, Chris.
So much. I want to thank you for coming and joining us. Thank you. You have our support on behalf of everybody here, on behalf of our CREDO Action Activism team, on behalf of our CREDO Donations Program. I want you to know you have it.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. And thanks for watching.
For video at the end. Yes. Thank you.
Yes. So now we'll take some.
Welcome, everyone, to our